Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Lopez, and I'll be the producer of this webinar today with a conversation with Reid Ribble, president of the NRCA. Before we get started, if you are a certified contractor with GAF, Master Select, Master Elite, and you would like to receive credit for attending this webinar, all you have to do is very simple. You can take out your phone, point out to the screen to this QR code. Once you do that with your camera, you don't have to click the picture, but as soon as you point your phone to this QR code, your phone will read it and you will get a link just like on the top of the screen, just like shown. That's one way that you can then register for to be able to receive credit and receive the certificate for attending this webinar. Or if this does not work for you, you can also take out your phone, go to your text message or your text app, text to the number 56512, the letter ALUZ3NX. So again, you either can do the QR code or you can text ALUZ3NX to 56512. Now, if you simply are sitting in front of your computer and you want to use a URL where you can go ahead and register, you can also do that. You can copy and paste the URL on the screen and be able to go to a browser, enter it, and then register for the webinar. As you do that, I just want to remind you the functionalities of Zoom. Number one, you have the ability to use the chat. As you use the chat, keep in mind that in order for not only the panelists, but also for you, the other attendees to see it, you will have to change your chat to all panelists and attendees. That way, all of us can see your comments or your questions. If you really want to ask a question, take advantage of the Q&A that you have at the bottom of your screen. Q&A will allow you to ask a question using your name, or you can also ask a question anonymously. So those are your two avenues to raise your question. If you have a comment you really want to share with us, you can also share, raise your hand and we can answer those as they come. We are going to have sessions throughout the webinar where we will take some of your questions. And at the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A. So if we don't answer all of your questions, I apologize in advance. But we will do our best to answer all of your questions. Now, without further ado, I am going to turn the time to Mr. John Ariano. Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lopez. Really appreciate it. Nice to see you're healthy with the goatee there. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy days to join us today, a conversation with Reid Ribble. I'm going to do a quick introduction of Reid, and then I'm going to get out of the way and let Reid take it away, because you're not here for me. You're certainly not here for Alan. You're here for the Honorable Reid Ribble. So let me introduce him. Reid Ribble is a CEO of the National Roofing Contractors Association, the NRCA, an organization that leads our industry in lobbying efforts across DC, training initiatives of contractors, fighting for the rights of the contractors, residential and commercial, across the U.S., everywhere they possibly can. They truly are a leader in our industry, and we are very proud at GAF to be associated with them. Prior to taking the helm of the NRCA, Reid Ribble was a two-time congressman in the United States House of Representatives, representing the wonderful state of Wisconsin. He did a tremendous amount of advocacy for the citizens of the state of Wisconsin, but also for the roofing community. He never forgot his background. And speaking of his background, prior to joining Congress, he was a very successful, large commercial roofing contractor in the state of Wisconsin. Many of you may not have known that. Reid is one of us. Reid, how are you?
Hey, John, I'm doing good. I can't think of a better way to start my afternoon than to spend it with you, your contractors, and Alan. So thanks for having me.
See you. So good to see you. The only thing that would make this better is if I was sitting across the table from you, Reid.
Yeah, that would make it better.
In the future.
Yes.
So You know, we've got an hour set aside for this, and we certainly don't want to make this a monologue. You and I discussed this previously. We want to make this a conversation, but let's go ahead and get this kicked off. Share with us what we have coined the state of the industry as you see it today.
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of aware of, there's been so much activity and so much information put out about COVID-19 that I don't really want to spend a lot of time just talking about that, but I mean, I'll touch on it a little bit. I want to talk more about where the industry finds itself today and where we are likely to be 6, 9, 12 months from now, because I think that's really the critical issue. The United States has entered a recession. We had negative gross GDP in the first quarter, around negative 3%. And I fully expect that to be a negative 8 or 9, maybe even more than that in the second quarter, with essentially the entire economy shut down. And so 2 straight consecutive quarters of negative growth means we're in a recession. So we're in that recession. Now the question is this going to be equal to or greater than or worse than the Great Recession that we had in 2008? Or is it even going to be equal to the Great Depression back in the 1930s, which is a possibility, quite frankly. I think we're going to see at the end of April unemployment numbers that could be as high as 27 to 30 million Americans. That'll put unemployment over 20%, which is Great Depression era types of numbers. And so how the economy reemerges after COVID-19 is dealt with is really the big question that the industry's weighing and trying to measure and figure out what happens next. And so a couple of things that I think I would just highlight. One is if you're a roofing contractor and you have not applied for or tried to get the payroll protection funds from the federal government, you need to do that immediately. As soon as we hang up this meeting, you need to be on the phone with your banker to get it, because I do believe this will be the last time that the federal government offers funds to pay for payroll, and those funds will pay for your payroll for 8 weeks. And I know there's a lot of you that have reached out to me and said, hey, Reid, I don't really feel I need it. Roofing is an essential business in our state, and we've been working all along. And the real issue is, though, that if you don't take it and your competition does, it's not so much about what happens today as what happens 6 or 7 months from now. And they're going to be in a much better cash flow position than you are because of it. And the government has now put you at a disadvantage because you were trying to be a better patriotic citizen. And so I would be very cautious with just walking away from it, because it could really harm you if the economy is in fact coming to a screeching halt. Now, what we're hearing from our members from around the country, and we do surveys regularly to find out how the business is going, is if you're a residential roofing contractor, you're likely to have seen a slowdown in business. If you're working in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in the Northeast, in California, you might be completely stopped and not be doing any business at all. If you're heavily into institutional roofing on the commercial side, where you do schools, universities, hospitals, things like that, you may have actually seen business go up. Or if you're in the Southeast or in an area where there's been bad weather, you might be busier than you've ever been. And so the reality is it depends on, your business is going to be totally dependent on where you live, what the rules are in the state for essential work, and the type of work that you're involved in. But on a go-forward basis, no matter what you're seeing today, you need to be prepared for a dramatic slowdown in future business. With nearly 30 million Americans unemployed right now, they are not going to be likely to spend money on either a new roof for their home, or if they own a restaurant or retail space or anything like that, any business that was deemed non-essential, they've not been making any money. That business may be liable to be going bankrupt. And so we're going to see a tightening of the market going into the fall, and everybody needs to be planning and thinking along those terms. Now, if you live along the southeast coast of the United States, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, possibly the Carolinas, a hurricane may be something that will pull some additional business in as we get into the storm season. But beyond that, I think that everyone ought to be prepared for a long tail to this COVID-19 until at some point we see a vaccine. And that's kind of the state of play that we're seeing right now, John.
You know, I've had many conversations with you, Reid, over the years, and you're usually a pretty rosy guy.
I am.
That's not.
Sorry.
That's not what I'm hearing from you today, friend. 3% negative 3% GDP, negative 8 or 9% GDP. Those are significant decreases in gross domestic product. And to your point, we are speaking to contractors on a daily basis as part of our standard business, and very much in alignment with what you shared. We're seeing some guys are busier than they've ever been. Some guys are dead in the water. Their local municipalities have shut down. They can't pull a building permit. But what the big concern that we are seeing, and I'd like you to share a little more on this topic if you can, is commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is a big engine that drives, a big segment of our commercial business. And so many of these shops are just shut down. And we understand that the tenants are still required or obligated to pay their rent. And how are they going to come back from this after 2-3 months of being shut down? Do they have the capital reserves to just flip a light switch on and get back to business?
Not likely. And I would prefer to be much more optimistic about what's in front of us. But let's take the typical restaurant owner or retail space. They're barely getting by in a regular April, May, June. A lot of retailers, they live for that period of time from about the 1st of November to the end of December during the Christmas season, and the rest of the year they're losing money. And even if the government says you can go back to work, they may, but if they have to serve people at the door, not let them into their retail space, or they've got to cut down the number of people that can come in for dinner, you're going to see a great amount of stress there. And there's a cascade that occurs, because if they cannot afford to pay their rent, then the landlord, the building or property owner, cannot afford to pay their mortgage. Mm-hmm. And this whole thing just starts to tumble apart. And if someone can't pay the mortgage, they're not going to pay for a roofing job. And that's the big threat. And now the government has done a lot to try to alleviate this. In fact, between the Federal Reserve and the federal government and Congress, they've now primed this pump with about $6 trillion. That's nearly a third of the nation's gross domestic product in the last 60 days. And so they may be able to avert the worst of it by providing some type of relief to companies that can't pay the mortgage. But the numbers that appear to be really frightening to me was that on April 1st, 6 million Americans were unable to pay their home mortgage, and 9 million Americans were unable to pay rent. And so this is that cascade that you're starting to see on your business, and our members are telling us about as they're talking with their customers. And so do we have concerns? Yes, we do. However, we also know that everybody needs a roof. And I think it's your tagline on your product line that you protect what matters most. And the reality is that when push comes to shove, if a customer has to make a decision about fixing or replacing the roof or buying that new or used car, they're going to fix their roof. And so we should recover faster than some of the other parts of the economy. Now, related to the question specifically about commercial roofing, construction in general is the largest multiplier in the nation's economy. So you start with a new construction building, there's a massive multiplier that occurs there, because you have to mine gravel, you have to make concrete, you've got the manufacturer produce drywall and paint and carpeting and roofing. All of those things get multiplied with construction. Re-roofing is a little bit less of a multiplier, but even there's a big multiplier that happens. And so the government is going to be very in tune about trying to get the construction industry back up and running. And that means you should expect that interest rates are going to stay low for a very long time, and they're going to try to do whatever they can to get construction back up. And so they have to have it. And the blessing of all this, and I don't want to take this down too much into politics, but it is an election year for the President of the United States. And if President Trump cannot get this economy moving by the election day, his reelection is really in big trouble.
It's very difficult to separate economics from politics.
It is,
as you said. I mean, and I'm speaking to the choir here. I'm sure you're still plugged in to.
I am.
I know you have lots of friends there, and you guys are chatting on the phone constantly. you mentioned previously that this previous round of funding for the PPP, for the SBA PPP, might be the last one. Is somebody whispering in your ear, grab the money before it's gone?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. They members of Congress I've spoken with have said they're not going to be extending payroll protection funding. They put $700 billion, that's nearly $1 trillion, for 8 weeks of payroll. I can't see them doing anything else. And you have to realize that the national debt has ballooned by $3 trillion just this year so far. Sure. And so they're going to be very, very reluctant. And I think that the post-mortem on this period, John, is going to be members of Congress taking a close look at how much money they've put back into the economy and asking this question: should they have just sent it directly to the taxpayer or individual American citizens, no matter what their age? Because they've spent so much money, they could have sent every man, woman, and child in the United States over $7,000 each. Wow. And maybe those 330 million Americans could have spent and deployed that money in a more efficient manner than the way the federal government did.
Free market economy versus federal government.
It has a tendency to work.
That's it. Now, what do you tell a contractor, be it residential or commercial, who his business is doing as good as ever, or he's trucking along, he's doing okay, his phone's ringing a little bit, maybe customers aren't buying as much as they have in the past, he's consuming a little bit of his backlog, he's a little bit worried about that, but he's a patriotic American. He doesn't feel he needs the PPP, the payroll protection funds. So he hasn't called his bank. Why? You mentioned previously that you strongly recommend after this call, after this conference now, that he get on the phone with his banker. What would you suggest they do with that money if their people are still employed and working?
I would go ahead and I would deploy the money in their company, because as long as they can document at the end of the 8 weeks that they put that money toward payroll. In essence, they didn't lay people off. Mm-hmm. They're making their payroll. Remember, all money's fungible, right? So if they're making their payroll and people are working, there's a extra surplus. There's a cushion, in essence, a cash reserve that they have that is now forgivable. It's not a loan, it's a grant that they can set aside if things do in fact slow down, that will help carry them through. And the reality is, good red-blooded Americans are a bit reluctant, and particularly the roofing industry, because we're kind of a self-assured, self-confident, self-reliant group of folks that run roofing companies. We don't want to be dependent on the government. We don't want to take a government handout as we might see it. The problem is that your competitor down the street might have done it. And when things get a little bit tighter, they're going to be in a different place competitively than you. And to me, that creates an uneven playing field in any marketplace. And so you ought to apply and hopefully get the funding for your 8 weeks of payroll, for your interest on your mortgage, your utilities, your health insurance, your rent payments, because all those elements are fully forgivable at the end of the period. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to be in a spot where your competition's at an advantage because they took this and you didn't. And that's my big concern for any roofing company that's out there saying, but I don't really think I need it. Well, you might not need it today, but you're likely to need it by the fourth quarter. And so that's why I'm saying be prepared for that moment. And you'll be thanking us later for doing that, I'm sure of it.
If ever the expression was more valid, we don't have a crystal ball. No one knows what's around the corner. No one predicted any of this. So it's nice to have a little bit of a safeguard there financially. The other piece to this, I suspect, that you're sharing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is, if I'm the contractor down the street and I did apply for PPP and, I've got 90 grand sitting in the checking account, maybe I can tighten up my prices a little bit and take that big job off the street.
That's correct. And we're seeing that happening already. And so you should expect that to happen. But I also think the thing that everybody needs to be aware of is the absolute optimum time to reach out for a loan is when you don't need a loan. That's the cheapest time for you to get a loan is when you don't need it. But the minute you need that loan, banking gets tight. They charge higher interest rates. They charge more fees because your risk is higher.
Correct.
Here, the government is guaranteeing it. You don't even have to give a personal guarantee. And so you're better off taking it when it's available. And then at the end of the day, you apply it toward your payroll, and it just helps you maintain your business through what might be a long slowdown. Because I don't think this gets better until there's a vaccine. I really don't. I mean, it'll be somewhat better, but I don't think it's going to be a lot better until there's a vaccine out there.
And who knows what the timing on that could be.
That's correct. It could be a year, it could be next month, it could be 2 years.
I was chatting with a friend of mine, roofing contractor in San Francisco. He's shut down, non-essential business. And, but, you know, he said he's going to get he applied for the PPP. He was approved. And he says, now I've got guys, you know, 6 foremen, my primary, you know, essential workers for his business, you know, sweeping the warehouse and changing the oil in the trucks. Is there a more productive way in your mind to
there is
those dollars?
Yeah, there is. And I think it's good for you and for NRCA. First of all, they ought to be getting on the phone with Alan and seeing what training they could be doing for the rest of their workers. They should be going to nrca.net, logging into our training programs. We've got a couple things that they could take advantage of during the slow time. Then they can use PPP dollars to pay payroll for these workers to get training we've got a program called Training for Roof Application Careers. And we also have a qualified trainer program to help you build a training company training program right inside your company. And so what you're seeing on the screen now is our link to Training for Roof Application Careers. This is 30 hours of training for asphalt shingle installation and single ply roofing. That is a tremendously powerful program. And it takes a worker through the entire process of putting on that thermoplastic roof or GPO roof. It also takes them through the process of putting on asphalt shingles. It works on safety and on the glossary, on language, so that someone, when they're done with this, they're completely conversationally competent and able to talk about roofing in a fluent manner. It's available in English or Spanish. And so if I were a contractor in an area of the country, yeah, you can click on the one that says qualified trainer there. If I were a contractor in a part of the country whereby they don't have where they can be an essential company, they can take PPP, pay their workers to go through the training. This is our qualified trainer program. We're launching our first online offering of this next week. But this is one of the most powerful training tools that we've ever created. And we take someone from your company and we teach them how to develop a training program in-house. And we give them all the skills necessary to train people, and particularly teach them how to connect with that young millennial worker that sometimes we don't always speak the same language to.
Sure.
And so these are 2 of the most highly regarded programs that NRCA offers. And I also know that GAF, through their CARE program, offers some tremendous training. And this is the time to seize that moment so that when you come out of it, if work is slow, you're in a better place competitively to differentiate your company from anybody else.
Yeah, you make a good point. And just looking at the screen as Alan was scrolling, I saw programs there that were 30 hours of education, 20 hours of education. We're not talking a 1-hour webinar.
No.
And then send the guys off to lunch. This is a very comprehensive, course curriculum.
It really is, and it's unlimited use in the company. Once you buy the curricula, you have it, you own it. It comes with a learning management software program so that you can monitor a particular worker's progress through the training. And if you see someone getting stuck someplace where they're taking the exam and they can't get to the next module because they're not passing the exam, someone in your company will see that, and NRCA will see that, and we can help do remedial education to get them to the next level. It's a very sophisticated training program and something that is extremely valuable to any contractor. And now's the time for those companies where they cannot work to get prepared for when they can.
That's one of the biggest fears that we are seeing from many of our contractors, especially in highly regulated states that are more W-2 as opposed to 1099.
Yes.
They're extremely concerned with having to lay off their their crew leaders, their superintendents, their, you know, lead foreman, second or assistant foreman. And then when this thing is over, when it's over, and who knows when that's going to happen, how do I get these guys back? And what if my competitors grab them first?
Right. Well, the key here then is to get that payroll protection loan. It becomes forgivable if you use it for payroll. Bring those people back in, put them to work by teaching them and paying them to learn. And now you've not lost any money because the government's paying for the payroll, paying their Social Security and Medicare taxes, paying your rent. It's really a valuable program. And we've now seen 13 states begin to reopen. I live in Tennessee, and Tennessee opened up this weekend. And you're going to start to see states now starting to reopen. First, some of the rural states in the south and central part of the U.S., and then the more populated states. But it wouldn't surprise me that by the 1st of June, most states are having roofing back as an essential service across the country. States like Michigan are going online May 7th, Pennsylvania going online May 8th. And so these states that have not allowed roofing work to happen are going to start in May. And so seize this moment to train and prepare for that when you can go back to work.
Yeah, there won't be much training once the economy opens up in your local municipality. There won't be much time for training. Every sunlit hour is going to be about producing, billable hours for your company.
Yeah, for sure. And it's an interesting thing. It's always a tension point as a business owner. I know it was for me and my own company when I had my roofing company. And while we were a sizable commercial company, we also had a pretty good-sized residential company. We were a GAF Master Elite Asphalt Shingle installer. And the fact of the matter is we had to make it a priority. And I would have some of my foremen or lead people say, well, we don't have the time to train. We don't, and if you train them, they're just going to go someplace else. And I said, my question to my foreman was, well, what are you trying to say to me, that it's worse for them to hire an untrained worker? Or do you want to have an untrained worker and have them stay here? I mean, that's foolishness to say, well, I'm not going to train them so I can keep them. You invest into people that have a tendency to stay with you a bit longer, actually.
Absolutely. Every data, every piece of analysis that we've ever done, as you know, at GAF, we invest very heavily in training through CARE, Center for the Advancement of Roofing Excellence. Alan, correct me, we're up to like 22 trainers now.
A little bit more, but yes, close.
More than that, I mean, that's a massive investment. And, we can tell you that when contractors invest in educating and training their people, making them better, they become part of a team. Their DNA becomes part of the culture of the company. They don't want to leave.
That's correct. And I was always more concerned about not training and having them stay. I mean, that's more of a problem for you on callbacks and warranties and dissatisfied customers. And today, with all the Yelp and Google reviews that you see online, you can't really afford to have a job go bad. And so there's a ton of pressure to make sure whether your W-2 crew or your 1099 crew, they have to be adequately trained. And you ought to be enforcing that down to your 1099 crews as well.
Push it downstream. Hey, Reid, a little premature as far as the clock is concerned, but I'm going to disregard the clock. We've got questions coming in. Do you want to take a couple?
Yeah, let's take some of those.
Mr. Lopez?
Yeah, we have actually one question divided into 3 sections by one of our listeners, which means, Reid, you talked about the loan. Number 1 part of the question is, what did you do if you get denied for the loan, or if you haven't received it in time or by now?
Yeah, well, even if you haven't received it, the people that are telling us that they haven't got their money yet are typically trying to go through one of the big national banks, Wells Fargo or Chase, or one of the big banks, JP Morgan or others. And those big banks got inundated with hundreds of thousands of loan applications, and the process is very slow. So step number 1 is try to build a relationship with a local or regional bank, because they're smaller, and they're better equipped to handle that paperwork and get it done because they've got fewer customers coming to them to get it. If you are denied, I would have to know more about that denial to know about it, because typically, if you're in a state that roofing is an essential work, or if I have heard some people being denied because they're predominantly 1099 roofing companies where they're hiring the bulk of their labor out through subcontract. Some of those accounts have been denied where they don't actually have work crews of their own. But I would not take no for an answer just because you get denied at one spot. I might try a different bank and reapply.
And, you know, if I can just chime in on that, on the tail end of that, I have spoken to a number of contractors who have been approved and have actually been funded, which is phenomenal. I'm so excited to hear that. But those companies that are primarily 1099, they generally will have a few W-2 employees on the payroll, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, you know, maybe it's the owner and his or her spouse, some office staff, and that I've heard does qualify. I've heard guys get money there. And then the other piece is that there's still the economic disaster loan that's out there, and that is not dependent on employees, is my understanding. Reid, do you agree with that?
No, that's correct. There's a whole cafeteria of programs that the federal government have offered, from tax credits that you can go back and refile your tax returns going back to 2015 and carry some losses back to there and refile those. You've got the disaster relief loans that are available. And I think in some cases where you're seeing denials, where people try to recover wages for 1099 employees, not understanding the process rather than just their W-2 employees. And so that might have triggered a denial. And so, but for the most part, banks are trying to get this money into people's hands. And my inbox is filled with roofing contractors that were able to get it through. And so I don't think you should take no for an answer. I think you ought to try another bank and make sure that you're only applying for W-2 wages in your application, as well as your rent and utilities and health insurance.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that. So I'm going to ask you to, shine off your magic crystal ball and tell us what does 2021 look like in our industry?
Yeah, I think by 2021, or certainly by the second quarter of 2021, we're likely to start to see a global recovery going on. And it'll be driven by a vaccine. I think within 18 months of when this started last December, that takes us to about May, about a year from now. There should be a vaccine out there. And at that point, things start to gear back up. And it's going to be really dependent on human behavior. When will people feel comfortable again to go to a restaurant? When will they feel comfortable again to go out shopping? When, and really important, when will they feel comfortable again to get on an airplane and go on vacation? I think those are some critical indicators and early indicators of when the economy is starting to move. If you're going to an airport and you're seeing a lot of people milling around, you should feel pretty good that things are coming back together. But I think it's going to be third and fourth quarter of 2021 that we start to see a more robust economy. And quite frankly, I think that's going to be dependent. That will not even be dependent on who wins the election in the fall. I think there are global forces at play that are beyond the ability of an individual political party to manage. What happens in Africa, South America, and Asia, and particularly in Europe, is irrelevant to what the U.S. government does internally here.
I think our population has taken a huge blow to our psyche, and this shelter in place order is just not something any of us are accustomed to. So it might be a while before we all of us let go of that. I'm reminded of, in the marketing space, there's a bell curve to people buying new technology. There's the first movers. Those are 16.5% of the population. I gotta have the new iPhone tonight, the night it goes on sale. And then there's 33% that follows, and you can track all this. And I suspect that our economy and our population will leave their homes, right, in a similar format. There's going to be some people that just can't get out of the house fast enough with lots of cash and find a restaurant to spend it at. And there's going to be others that are going to sit home for a little while longer.
Yeah, and kind of wait that out. Yeah, I think you're right. It's going to be very interesting. We just sent out, NRCA just sent out a survey to our 300 volunteers that typically come into Chicago for our July committee meetings, asking them if they're going to feel comfortable if Chicago's open by then, traveling and coming to Chicago for a meeting with 300 people. And I think what you just described is exactly what we're likely to see. There's going to be a group of them that are just anxious to get out of the house for any reason and go someplace because they've been locked in for so long. And then there's going to be another group that are going to say, you know what, I'll let them be the crash test dummy, and we'll see if it all works out. And then there'll be the very, very slow adopters that are saying, I'm just going to wait this out till next year. Yeah. And I think you're going to see that in the broader economy and how customers purchase things. And so there'll be some pent up demand for sure. People that have been waiting to get that new project done, or maybe they want to sell their home and they got to fix it up. They're going to get that roof done no matter what. And so there'll be some pent up demand in that as well.
I think so. That's our feeling as well, is that people in general, the majority of Americans did not lose their job. And I define majority as 50% plus one, 51%. Yeah. But they're not spending the money for a couple of reasons. One, there's nowhere to spend it, right? And two, I may lose my job tomorrow. So I'm just going to hold on to it and let it sit in the bank. But I'm looking at my kitchen more than I ever have. I'm looking at my bathrooms more than I ever have, my garden, the roof, the gutters, the siding, the windows, and I'm just getting sick of it. And so to your point, I think when this is over, there's going to be some considerable pent-up demand. We've had some storms in the South, hailstorms, and the contractors are reporting back to us that there are a number of people that just say, I'm going to wait this out. I have a year that you say, I'm going to wait a year until I file a claim. And I suspect they're in that camp, right? That they're doing okay financially. Mr. and Mrs. are still working, but that doesn't mean we're going to spend money yet.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about them seeing their kitchens or bathrooms, John, because I was talking with Mark Graham, the head of our technical services department. We've got 6 folks that just answer questions from our members all the time and from consumers, quite frankly. The number one call that we're getting from consumers right now is how do they get rid of the staining that's going on in their roof? Now, these people have never called NRCA about how to get rid of a stain on the roof because they've never noticed it before.
Never looked at it.
I would bet 9 out of 10 customers can't even tell you what color their roof is. But in reality, they're home now and right. They're seeing it now. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden it's triggered all these calls about how do I get my roof looking good again? And so people are more aware. And so some of that is going to lead to demand as soon as people can get out. And the fact that they've not been able to spend money is the likelihood that they have money. Correct. Because they've been saving some money as well. So 75% of the population is going about business as normal. Correct. And if you're in healthcare, you're working harder than ever right now. Mm-hmm. And some businesses in every recession win and some lose. And in this case, those people that are the winners are still going to continue to do commerce as normal.
Plenty of books out there on that topic, that in every recession, in every economically negative environment, there are winners. There are millionaires that become billionaires and thousandaires that become millionaires. The stories are out there. And if I was a smarter person, which I'm not, I have a couple of books I could recommend today. But I'm glad you mentioned that. Question for you. This is all tying back to pent-up demand. If we agree that demand is being pent up currently, right, because I am an optimist, I believe that, then it kind of loops back to our previous conversation of when the doors open, when we get, as I like to say, when we get out of jail, right, our home confinement, as a roofing company owner, as a business person, I better have access to employees to capture some of this opportunity.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 things that are likely to happen. One is roofing workers are going to be anxious to go back to work. Mm-hmm. They're in roofing work because they like to be outside. They like to do things with their hands, and And we're not likely to lose many of those workers. I think those workers come back. But we've had a significant shortage of workers going into this crisis. But now with 25 million Americans unemployed, these unemployed Americans are also wondering about their future.
Great.
And they're going to be looking for something to do and maybe look for a trade that is less susceptible to recessions than what they're currently in. So they might be a waiter in a restaurant, or they might be working at some retail store and their store's not open yet. And they're not all that excited about going back there and being in such close contact with a lot of people for $12 an hour. Mm-hmm. And those people are going to be out looking. I was talking with a member just the other day who said he's picked up 7 new workers in the last 2 weeks, none of them with previous experience in the roofing industry, but all willing and anxious to learn a new trade. And so I think there's going to be some opportunity for roofing companies to hire workers that are new and fresh and anxious to learn, maybe in a way that we've not seen since 2008, 2009.
I heard the same thing from a contractor in Tampa, Florida last Friday. He had his best March ever. And he's picked up, I don't recall the count, I don't think it was quite 7, 3 or 4 folks that were outside of the industry, labor category, and he put them into his training program. He says, I can't wait to put these folks on the roof. It's been years since somebody knocked on my door saying, hey, I want to learn how to put a roof on.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that with NRCA's investment in our professional certifications for roofing workers, mm-hmm. We've done so much media about this on our Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter accounts that have tens of thousands, some cases hundreds of thousands of people that see it, that are now aware that if they go into the roofing industry and they align themselves with the right partner, with the right company, that they have a chance to achieve professional certifications. They can become a pro-certified asphalt shingle installer, a pro-certified foreman, a pro-certified thermoplastic installer, and they can actually begin to build a career that certification is recognized nationally. And the roofing company owners, those companies that have certified crews now, are reporting back to us that the demand for their certified workers is very high, much higher than otherwise. And it's another key way of differentiating yourself when you're trying to recruit new workers, that you can show them a specific career path that they could have, and also to differentiate yourself in your marketplace and say, yeah, I understand that guy's at this price, but I'd be willing to bet you none of his workers have had third-party authentication of their skill, and we can offer you that. And so roofing companies are learning that they can become more profitable, and that's really what this is all about, right? That's why we're in business. They can become more profitable if they have professionally certified, third-party certified crews.
I certainly have never been as eloquent as you, Reid, but I've referred to your certification program as the Mr. Goodwrench certification of the roofing industry. And there is a segment of the population that would take their car down to the mom and pop mechanic on Main Street. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's another segment of the population that says, my Chevy's going to the Chevy dealer, period, because they know my car, right? And so I commend the NRCA's efforts in trying to bring that into the roofing industry, because those folks going to the Chevy dealer or whatever dealer, they're paying top dollar for a service, and they don't mind doing it.
They are, because they don't mind paying it because they trust it. Correct. Because they know that worker has been trained and has passed an exam to authenticate that the training actually stuck. It's one thing to send a worker to a class or to a school and say, get this training. It's quite another to take the time and effort and test that worker to see whether or not the skill has actually been achieved. And that's what our certification program is all about. It's mm-hmm. authenticating that roofing worker actually has the competency to do that work and has passed an exam in front of a third-party inspector.
Well, and it makes what we do every day a career instead of
a job.
That's a big deal. I mean, I speak to steel workers or people that work on oil rigs, union workers. It's a career. That's not a job. So
that's correct.
I love it. Got a couple questions here. Mr. Lopez, in the background there, if you wouldn't mind putting some links up in the in the chat box to ProCert and NRCA's COVID page, that would be great. And I can read the questions
Okay.
out. Let's see here. We're gonna go. Oh, this is a softball. I'm gonna softball this
I
one.
like softball questions.
Mr. Ryan Diaz, and this is a common question, Ryan. That's why I say it's a softball. We hear it quite a bit. I have applied with Bank of America for the PPP loan. I have not heard from them. No email response, no phone call that they've received my application. If I apply with another bank, would that be considered trying to double dip?
It can be. And so before you apply with another bank, you need to get a determination now from Bank of America. And that may require, you getting on the phone and talking with your lender directly so you can find out where you are in the process. And Bank of America is a good example here. Big national bank. They probably got 300,000 applications nationwide. And you're caught up in this stack of applications waiting to be processed. And so, but somebody, that information is there someplace, and somebody at that bank should be able to help you and let you know. My concern is if you withdraw that one and go someplace else because it's taking too long to get it, my concern is that you start back at ground zero, but when you're already entered into the system. And so I wouldn't recommend withdrawing it from Bank of America. Instead, I would recommend to become the squeaky wheel, because you're more likely to get the grease if you do.
And if I can just add to that wonderful response, thank you, Reid. Mr. Diaz, Ryan Diaz, we did have a speaker a couple of weeks ago from Chase Morgan. And what the gentleman shared with us was that the intake website to apply for the loans was built in 3 or 4 days and simply did not have integrated into it the functionality that most of us are accustomed to. In other words, I go to my Bank of America website, their website, I apply for a loan, they send me a confirmation email, maybe a confirmation text. The SBA system did not build any confirmation mechanism into it when it launched, and to my knowledge, it's still not been there. So the fact that you've heard nothing from your bank is that's typical. All right, let's move on to another question. Keep them coming, guys. These are great questions. Okay, Mr. Ribble. Given that we are seeing a recession and a hike in unemployment, there seems to be a greater risk for contractors specializing in storm-related insurance claims as it relates to collecting insurance funds from the property owner. Is there anything the NRCA can do to help force change in insurance process to release depreciation and supplemental amounts or income directly to contractors?
We have that conversation. And listen, I really appreciate this conversation about the insurance industry. I was on a conference call with the insurance industry yesterday, and this topic comes up in virtually every single one. NRCA is also, even though we don't do direct lobbying at the state level, we have been involved in a number of state pieces of legislature that we provided expert testimony for and letters to legislators about topics like this to protect contractors who are doing storm mitigation work, to make sure that they actually get paid and that they become they're co-designated on that check. So the check gets cut to the homeowner and to them at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that homeowner can't just take the money and run after you've already done the work, or in fact find some bogus reason not to pay you. And so we're engaged in that all the time and are advocating for roofing contractors nationwide on that issue. Some places we've been successful, and some states have been successful, and others a bit less so. And so, but I want you to know for sure that your national association is at the forefront of these meetings, and we're sitting at the table in those meetings with the industry stakeholders.
And you know, Reid, in my travels in this industry and meeting with contractors and hosting a number of meetings, it surprises me how few contractors are members of the NRCA, one, and two, are truly aware of everything the NRCA does for the industry. What I'd like to do, if you don't mind, because I think this was groundbreaking. I come from a commercial roofing background as well. Tell us about the change in depreciation for commercial roofing assemblies that you, Reid Ribble, led through Congress just a short year and a half ago.
Yeah, it happened in 2017. But here's the reality. Prior to the tax law that was signed in 2017, commercial roofing jobs, if one of your customers went and bought a new commercial roof, they would have to depreciate the cost of that over 39 years. So the roof that you tore off might have been 20 years old. They continue to depreciate that one for another 19 years, even though it's in the landfill. And then they can begin to depreciate 1/39 of the current one. And what we were able to do is in the new tax bill that was passed, get 100% expensing of that new commercial roof for that commercial owner, so they could expense it off of their taxes in year one up to $1 million. And if they didn't have $1 million of profit, they could carry the loss forward for 5 years. And so it was in essence about a 30% reduction in cost to your commercial customer as a result of NRCA's advocacy that took place. And it was the first time ever that was written, and roofing was written specifically into the tax code. And so NRCA is working on your behalf, commercial or residential, in 100 different places that are never seen. It's difficult for us to get our story out, quite frankly. People hear of us, and I really don't want to make this webinar a sales pitch, but I would just say this, John, since you are gracious enough to tee it up. NRCA is a not-for-profit advocacy company that advocates for the roofing industry across all stakeholders. And the dues money that comes into NRCA is deployed in the year that we receive it to make the landscape in which every roofing contractor works more fair, more even, and better balanced. And I know that I have a lot of people say, well, if I send you your $1,300 in dues or $5,000, whatever it is based on the size of your company, I don't know what my ROI is on that. And everybody's looking for that immediate return on investment. But I will guarantee you that every single year, just the provisions that we were able to get into the tax code would pay your NRCA dues for the rest of your career, whether you're a residential contractor or commercial, because we were able to get 20% of your first, if you're a sub-S company, 20% of your earnings each year are tax-free. And I mean, the money that you're saving as a result of our advocacy is worth tens of thousands. And in some cases, if you're a $10 or $12 million contractor, $1 million a year, each and every year. And so there is a return on investment, but we do the best we can, and we want everybody to be part of it. And we can do more if there are more of you that join. And that's just the reality of it, because we are a not-for-profit company, and we deploy that revenue every year.
You know, and I would
love to have you join.
I'll just jump on your coattails for a little bit, Reid, which I've been doing for years. So why stop now? If you are a GAF contractor certified with us on the residential side or the commercial side or the liquids business, and you have not joined the NRCA, we will pay your first year membership free. So just talk to your GAF territory manager, and we'll get that going for you. We are approaching the end here, which I regret. So I'd like to go ahead and open this up to a Q&A. Please type in your questions into the chat box or to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Just hover your mouse on the screen and you'll see the chat box open up. And let's ask the Honorable Reid Ribble some questions here before we have to conclude this wonderful meeting.
Hey, John, there was one question on the chat. Terry wanted to know, when talking about unemployment filing, his question was, what about 1099 unemployment filing?
Yeah, so because it's a 1099 employee, they would have to go ahead and apply for unemployment based on their own workers' modification. I'm sorry, not workers' modification. They'd applied based on their own tax filing. And so they're not able to file for unemployment as a 1099 employee off of your company's unemployment insurance. Mm-hmm. And so they had, otherwise they would become an employee. And the last thing you would want is for them to be called an employee, and then they can go back and claim Social Security withholdings and things like that for all those years. They're either 1099 or they're an employee. They're an employee, they have the right to get unemployment off of your company's insurance. They're a 1099, then they needed to be paying it on their own, and they apply through their own company.
Thank you, Reid. Terry, I'd also ask you to check the state in which you're operating. I can tell you, I live in San Antonio, and in the state of Texas, when this first happened, 1099 subcontractors could not apply for unemployment benefits because the first thing the website asked for was for you to upload your last W-2, which of course they don't have. And I know that changed very, very rapidly in the state of Texas. They removed that requirement just to get some paychecks into the people's hands, right? So they could eat. So check your state, and then whatever you find in your state, if you find it to be beneficial, by all means, please communicate it to your people. Please let them know, you know, because if they're sitting at home right now wondering how they're going to eat, that's a big problem, and none of us should have anyone on our staff in that environment.
And that's correct, John. And the CARES Act also provided an additional $600 per week. Because like in the state of Illinois, if you're laid off there, you get the unemployment compensation is 47% of your average gross wage. But with the $600 a week bump up that the CARES Act provided, plus $150 a week for children, you might actually be getting 100 or 110% of a person's wage on unemployment, which is critical to carry them through so they can make their home payments and rent payments and so forth. So
that's a great point. I forgot about the additional rider on top of unemployment. So some folks are, you know, they can shelter in place okay and not worry about keeping the lights on.
That's correct.
Terry responded that Ohio is allowing it now, but their platform is not up yet. Yeah. The importance of IT people have never been realized so much as they are today.
Yeah, you know, we think everything works on the internet and that it's all there, but we often find that these unique things are not. And in some states, if you're a 1099 employer, you have your own federal ID number that you can put in so they can track your wages on what you were paid the previous year.
Wonderful. Okay, any other questions?
Looks like that's all we have.
That's all we have, right at the top of the hour. Mr. Ribble, I can't say this, I have the utmost respect for you, always have. I knew you back when you were a roofing contractor, and you know, we're always, you know, working on supporting your business, and I am always so proud to know you and call you a friend. Thank you for doing this for us. This is a really big deal. Any final words before we part ways today?
You know, I would just say this. It's so important for roofing contractors. We talked a bit about NRCA membership, but I also want to talk about the partnership that you have with your local manufacturers and distributors, particularly a company like GAF and what they're doing on education. And their contractor program has always been heralded as one of the very best in the industry. And so hold your friends close in this next few months. And the last piece of advice I would give everybody is make sure you're staying right on top of your accounts receivables, because if things start to slip and go south a little bit for your customers, you don't want to be the last person in line to get paid. And so just stay on top of that as best as you possibly can, and stay in touch with John and Alan for training opportunities that GAF brings your way. Now is the perfect time to do it.
Awesome. Thank you, Reid. Thank you to everyone on the webinar. Mr. Lopez, as always, you're a phenomenal producer. We thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.
Take care, everybody.